Right now, you are safe. Solid ground under your feet, warm air, an ordinary afternoon. The scariest thing that might happen today is spilling your coffee or missing a train. But 200 kilometers up, a handful of people have been seconds from certain death. Trapped, spinning, burning, or bleeding air into the void with no way out. And somehow, against every law of luck and physics, they walked away alive. These are the astronauts who survived the impossible. A stuck thruster that spun a ship like a bullet. An explosion halfway to the moon. A suit that swelled shut in space. A rocket that caught fire with 2 men strapped on top. 6 impossible survivals, and by the end, you'll never call your own day boring again. Stay with me. Let's begin with the most famous survival story ever told. April 1970. 3 men were flying to the moon aboard Apollo 13. Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes. They were 200,000 miles from home, closer to the moon than to Earth. Then Houston asked them to stir the oxygen tanks. A routine flip of a switch and a sharp bang shuddered through the entire spacecraft. An oxygen tank had exploded, blowing an entire panel off the side of their ship. Swigert radioed down, steady and cold. "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Through the window, they watched their oxygen venting away into black space. Their power was failing. The command module, their ride home, was going dark and cold. Their only lifeboat was the tiny lunar lander clipped to the nose of the ship. It was built to keep 2 men alive for 2 days. Now it had to save 3 for 4. They powered almost everything off. The cabin fell to just above freezing. They shivered in the dark and rationed water down to 6 ounces a day. Then a new killer crept in. Carbon dioxide, rising toward deadly levels in the cabin. Their air filters were the wrong shape to fit the lander's system. So engineers built a fix on the ground from a bag, a hose, a sock, and duct tape, and read it up step by step. The crew taped it together and watched the poison drop. For 4 freezing, exhausting days, they nursed their crippled ship around the moon. Then they fell back to Earth and splashed into the Pacific Ocean, all 3 alive. NASA called it a successful failure. Really, it was 3 men who refused to die. Now rewind 4 years to 1966, and a name you already know, Neil Armstrong. 3 years before the moon, he nearly died in Earth orbit. He and David Scott had just made history, the first docking of 2 spacecraft, a perfect success. Then, 27 minutes later, it turned into a nightmare. The joined ships began to roll, gently at first, then faster still. A thruster had short-circuited and stuck wide open, firing and firing without stop. Armstrong undocked to escape it, but that only let the spin explode out of control. Now their little capsule was tumbling a full turn every second, once per second. The stars blurred into streaks. Their vision started to grey out and tunnel. A few more seconds and both men would black out and never wake again. So Armstrong did something no simulator had ever taught him. He shut down the main thrusters entirely and fired the small jets meant only for re-entry, wrestling the spin by hand, using up the fuel that was supposed to bring them home. And it worked. The mad tumbling slowed, and finally, the stars held still. It cost them the whole mission. They splashed down that same day near Okinawa, alive. If you think that's terrifying, subscribe because it somehow gets worse from here. Next, the first man ever to float in open space nearly never came back inside. March 1965. Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov aboard Voskhod 2. He opened the hatch and pushed himself out into the vacuum of space, the first human being ever to float free above the whole planet. For 12 minutes, he drifted in silent wonder, weightless over the blue curve of the Earth. Then it was time to climb back in, and that's when his own suit turned on him. With no pressure outside it, the suit had ballooned up stiff and rigid and huge. His hands pulled out of the gloves. His feet slipped up out of the boots, and the swollen suit no longer fit through the airlock he'd just come out of. He was trapped outside his ship, sealed inside a balloon he could not bend. His pulse was racing, his body was overheating, and orbital night was rushing toward him. In darkness, he'd be blind and freezing, with his oxygen ticking down. So he took a deadly gamble. He cracked a valve and bled his own air out into space, letting the suit deflate and risking the bends, the deadly bubbles that can kill a diver. Shrunken and shaking, he forced himself in head first and sealed the hatch behind him. He had made it, with almost nothing to spare, and the world was told none of it for decades. The first man to walk in space had very nearly become the first to die in it. Sometimes the deadliest part of spaceflight isn't space. It's the ride up and the ride down. April 1975. Cosmonauts Vasily Lazarev and Oleg Makarov. Their rocket lifted off, climbing toward a space station waiting in orbit. But high up, as the stages fired, they failed to separate the way they should have. The guidance computer sensed the ship tilting the wrong way and hit the panic switch. It triggered the escape sequence, tearing their capsule off the rocket in mid-climb. In an instant, they weren't going to orbit anymore. They were falling back to Earth, and they fell steep and fast, slamming into the thickening air like a hurled stone. The crew were crushed under more than 20 times their own weight, 21 Gs. Imagine a small car sitting on your chest while you try to keep breathing. Lazarev was injured internally. They could barely move, let alone control the fall. The capsule dropped onto a snowy slope in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, 1,600 kilometers off course, and began sliding straight toward a cliff edge. Then its parachute snagged in the trees and jerked them still, just short of the drop. Bruised and freezing, they had no idea where they were. They feared they'd fallen into China. Thrown off a rocket, crushed and dropped in the mountains. Could you stay calm through that? Tell me below. Now picture the worst place to be, strapped to a rocket that catches fire on the ground. September 1983. Vladimir Titov and Gennady Strekalov. They lay on their backs atop a fully fueled Soyuz rocket, minutes from launch. About 90 seconds before liftoff, a valve failed and fuel poured out at the base. It caught fire. Flames began crawling up the rocket, licking around the fuel tanks. Beneath them sat hundreds of tons of propellant, seconds from becoming a bomb. But the flames had already burned through the wires to the automatic escape system. So two engineers, in separate rooms, had to send the abort command by hand, together. They keyed it in at the same moment. A rocket in the capsule's nose roared to life and ripped the crew straight up off the tower at 17 times the force of gravity. 2 seconds later, the whole rocket below them erupted into a mountain of fire. Their capsule arced away and drifted down on a parachute, 3 kilometers from the blaze. The two men thumped onto the ground, shaken and bruised, and were handed a shot of vodka. They had been pulled off an exploding rocket with barely 2 seconds to spare. To this day, it is the only time an escape rocket has ever saved a crew right on the pad. And then there's the day a spaceship got a hole punched clean through its side. June 1997, a 7-ton cargo ship was being steered in by hand in a risky test to save money. But the crew misjudged its speed. It was closing far too fast, and it wasn't slowing. It swelled in the window like a runaway truck, and then it struck the Spectre module. The whole station shuddered. Instantly, their ears popped. The hole had been breached. The air of the whole station was screaming out through a hole into the vacuum. A siren wailed. They had minutes, maybe less, before every breath was gone. The leak was inside Spectre, and their only chance was to seal that module off, fast. But a tangle of thick cables ran through the hatch, holding it wide open. So cosmonaut Alexander Lazutkin ripped the cables free with his bare hands, and the crew slammed a hatch cover over the hole, sealing the dying module away. The hissing stopped. The pressure held. 3 men, saved by seconds and raw nerve. American astronaut Michael Foale called it the most frightening moment of his life. A cargo ship had punched a hole in their home, and they beat it with their hands. So many chances to die, and every single one of these crews came home, which forces a strange, important question. How did any of them actually make it? Because, here's the truth. What saved them was not just luck. Look closely, and the same 3 things rescued every one of these crews. First, engineers who imagined the disaster years before it ever happened, and quietly built the escape rocket, the lifeboat, the hatch cover, in advance. Second, thousands of hours of training until the right move became pure instinct. Armstrong didn't reason his way out of that spin. His hands already knew the answer. And third, a strange cold calm when everything was falling apart. While their ships were dying around them, these people got quieter, not louder. They stopped, they looked at the problem, and they did the next small thing right. That is the real secret. Not fearlessness, focus, when panic would be so much easier. They were terrified. They just refused to let the terror make the decisions. The impossible gets survived by people who prepared for it, then stayed calm inside the fire. So let's come back down to you, right now, safe and still on the ground. Your feet on the floor, air that asks nothing of you, a perfectly ordinary day. A few hundred kilometers straight up That ordinary calm is a miracle few have survived. Lovell watched his air pour into space and stayed steady enough to fly home. Armstrong spun once a second toward blackout and found the fix in his own hands. Leonov bled the air from his suit rather than stay trapped outside forever. Lazarev fell from the edge of space and stopped a hand's width from a cliff. Titov rode a fireball off the pad. Foley's crew sealed a hole with their fingers. Every one of them stared straight at certain death and quietly told it no. You'll get annoyed by small things today. A slow line, a rude message, a red light. They would have given anything for a day this dull, this safe, this wonderfully alive. So when your day feels heavy, remember what a gift an ordinary one truly is, because somewhere above you, ordinary is the rarest, most precious thing there is. Next time, I'll show you the astronauts who saw things in space that science still can't explain. Don't look away.